So before we get back into Frankenstein, I want to remind everybody that the midterm exam is a week from today, right? So I am going to give all of you sample questions to study from tonight. I'll send out a document. Those will be less specific than the actual exam questions will be, but they will at least let you know like what kinds of themes and ideas you'll be working with for the essay questions, right? And if you're prepared, like you'll answer one essay question on the exam itself. So if you're prepared to answer 2 of the practice questions with a couple of different texts, then you should be pretty well prepared. There's also going to be a vocab section. Everything on the vocab section will be drawn from the vocab quizzes that you've been taking, right? And so I've reopened those, one, so that if you've missed any, you can go back and complete them. And also so that you can see what those words were, right? So you can kind of, create a little study bank for yourself. Does anybody have any questions about the exam? Yeah, Ashley.
Oh, not the exam. You said you reopened the quizzes. When will you close them back down again?
They'll be open till the end of this week.
Okay.
So yeah, if you missed any and need to get caught up, yeah, those will be open till the end of the week.
What day is that?
The midterm is a week from today.
Is it like gonna be during the time of our class or?
Oh yeah, it'll be during regular class time, and we'll be indoors for that. We'll go upstairs because it'll be less distracting. I will also provide blue books for everybody, so you won't have to worry about that. Does anybody have other questions about the midterm exam? Okay, just to reiterate quickly, basic format is going to be one essay question. You're going to give me 500 words to answer the question, right? You'll have 3 to choose from. And then I'll give you 12 vocab terms to choose from. You'll choose 8. And you will give me the relevant text, the author of that text, and a brief definition. Right? So the same thing you give me for the terms in the vocab quizzes. Okay. So, how did the second half of Frankenstein go for y'all?
It was kind of like watching a movie. Like I was reading it.
Uh-huh.
And then I'd be like, oh shit. It's kind of crazy.
Okay. Good.
I knew how it was going to end. I've read this novel
Sure.
a lot. Yeah, I agree. You can kind of get that like you're reading a movie.
Okay, yeah, I mean, the series of collapses, right, in Victor Frankenstein's life is fairly spectacular, but we don't end with Frankenstein himself, right? And this is actually one of the things I want to talk a little bit about today. I want to return to some of the stuff we were talking about, with, the imaginary and the mirror stage and the symbolic order, right? But I think today I want to start by looking a little bit more closely at the form of this novel, right? Which is one of the weirdest things about it, one of the most interesting things about it, really. So, how many different layers of story do we have here? 3? Okay. Yeah, what's the first layer? What's the outermost layer of the story?
Walton's.
Yeah, we have Robert Walton's expedition, right? So all the rest of the action, right, all the rest of the narrative is contained within Robert Walton's letters home to his sister, right? And then what's the second layer?
Victor's story.
Yeah, layer 2. Is Victor's narrative. Right, the story he tells to Walton on his sickbed aboard Walton's ship, right? And then what's layer 3?
Features.
Yeah, we have the creature's own narrative. Told to Victor on the side of the mountain, right? So, we have in Frankenstein a form that was much more common in the 18th and early 19th centuries than in contemporary writing, right? So it's called an epistolary novel. Meaning a novel in letters. And what this does, right, is kind of create a story out of a series of fragmentary perspectives, right? Each letter writer, each storyteller sees a different piece of the whole. And it's then up to the reader to piece together what that is. Another good example of a horror novel that works in this way, like have any of you ever read Dracula? Yeah, Dracula is also told mostly in terms of like letters and diary entries, right? And even within these other narratives, right, we see the importance of letters and diaries as a means of communication, right? Now, what the novel ultimately does is put us in the position of the recipient of Walton's letters, right? So let's think about how Walton's expedition frames the entire story. Because really, for the recipient of these letters, that would actually be the subject of primary interest, right? Whether the letters actually make it somehow to Walton's sister, or whether, they're discovered, on his wrecked ship, right, or what have you, right? What the initial recipient of these letters would be most interested in is what happened to Robert Walton. And what is the upshot? Like, what's Walton trying to do?
He's trying to map out territory that hasn't been explored yet.
Yeah, he's in the Arctic, right? And specifically, he is trying to locate the legendary Northwest Passage. Right, so it was believed that if you went far enough from Europe to the Northwest, you could find a quicker passage to Asia. And that's what he's trying to do, right? He's doing this in the 18th century at a time when, the great quote-unquote voyages of, exploration, read colonization, are pretty much over, right? And there are many blank spaces left on the world map. So Walton is coming along kind of late in the game, trying to plant his flag in something, right? Stick his name in something, right? And what is the upshot of his expedition? How does it end up? Yeah, he's stuck in the ice.
It's like the Franklin expedition.
What's that?
The Franklin expedition.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So the Franklin expedition was these two ships, the Terror and the Erebus, and they were looking for the Northwest Passage. They got trapped in ice and resulted in cannibalism.
Yeah. Now,
And needed their boots.
at least as far as we can tell, things on Walton's ship don't go that far,
No.
right?
Hopefully.
Why don't they go that far? Are Walton's men willing to stick it out? Yeah, he essentially has to put down a potential mutiny, right? The sailors refuse to continue on. So Walton's expedition ends up being a bust, right? So we have to consider these other narratives inside of Walton's letters in the context of Walton's own failure here. Do we have any independent evidence in the novel that Victor or the creature exist? We basically just have Walton's word to go on, right? Why don't we even have a body to prove Victor Frankenstein's existence? What happens to Victor's body?
Isn't it just like left in ice?
What's that?
Like it's left.
Well, let's turn to page 215 here, right? When the creature has climbed aboard Walton's ship, and Walton finds him kind of like hunched over Frankenstein's corpse, right? Farewell, I leave you, and in you the last of humankind whom these eyes will ever behold. Farewell, Frankenstein. If thou wert yet alive and yet cherished a desire of revenge against me, it would be better satiated in my life than in my destruction. But it was not so. Thou didst seek my extinction, that I might not cause greater wretchedness. And if yet, in some mode unknown to me, thou hast yet ceased to think and feel, thou desirest not my life for my own misery. Blasted as thou wert, my agony was still superior to thine, for the bitter sting of remorse may not cease to rankle in my wounds until death shall close them forever. But soon, he cried, with sad and solemn enthusiasm, I shall die, and what I now feel will be no longer felt. Soon these burning miseries will be extinct. I shall ascend my funeral pile triumphantly and exult in the agony of the torturing flames. The light of that conflagration will fade away. My ashes will be swept into the sea by the winds. My spirit will sleep in peace, or if it thinks, it will not surely think thus. Farewell. He sprung from the cabin window, as he said this, upon the ice raft which lay close to the vessel. He was soon borne away by the waves and lost in darkness and distance. So the creature has taken Frankenstein's body, jumped off the ship onto his ice raft, and claims to be going away to burn them both, right? So there's no evidence of the existence of either at the end of all of this, right? Frankenstein and the creature are both obliterated. one way we could look at this is that the entirety of the narrative is invented by Walton to cover up and explain his failure. Right, well, I was out on the ice, and I met this guy who told me a story about the hubris of trying to, mess with things human beings are not meant to know. And it got me thinking, and I came home. But I think there are also kind of like some interesting connections here between all three of these narratives that it might be worth it to draw out and explore, right? In particular, in the way all three deal with relationships with fathers. Right, so we talked about mothers last time, right? In particular, the kind of like condition of motherlessness that seems to be what's going on with so many of the characters in the book. And the passing around of that mother token in the first murder that the creature commits. But I think there's some interesting father stuff going on here as well that it might be worth it to try to pull out. So let's revisit briefly the theoretical model we were looking at last time, right, taken from the work of Jacques Lacan. So what do we remember about these stages of development, according to Lacan?
Your imaginary is when you're dependent on your mother for all physical needs.
Yeah. And you're so dependent on your mother in the imaginary stage, right, that you don't yet recognize yourself as a separate being.
In the marriage stage, you begin to develop your sense of self separate from your mother.
Okay.
And then the symbolic order is that as you learn language, you learn your place not only in your family, but in your world.
Yes. So yeah, the symbolic order, you learn language, and in so doing, you learn your place in society more broadly, right? Now, the symbolic order is also referred to by Lacan as the law of the father. So in the imaginary, you're in the mother's world, right? You and mother are more or less one continuous being. In the symbolic, you are obedient to the rules laid down by a patriarchal society. Right? You are placed within whatever your particular position is in that patriarchal society, right? Now, if we look at the way this is relevant to the monster story, for the creature story first, right? What's happening with the creature on a kind of father level here? What's the creature's relationship with its father?
Non-existent.
Yeah, I mean,
aggressive.
yeah. The father completely denies its existence, right? Or denies it any care, right? And denies any responsibility for it, right? So the creature is essentially told by Victor, right, that it has no place in this order. But I think that Walton and Victor Frankenstein both have kind of complicated father relationships to tease out here. And with Walton, it's mentioned only briefly. So let's go back to the beginning of the novel. To Walton's first letter to his sister. And what, on page 8, has prevented Walton from going to sea from an early age? If you look at the paragraph in the middle of the page, right? These reflections have dispelled the agitation with which I began my letter, and I feel my heart glow with an enthusiasm which elevates me to heaven. For nothing contributes so much to tranquilize the mind as a steady purpose, a point on which the soul may fix its intellectual eye. This expedition has been the favorite dream of my early years. I have read with ardor the accounts of the various voyages which have been made in the prospect of arriving in the North Pacific Ocean through the seas which surround the pole. You may remember that a history of all the voyages made for purposes of discovery composed the whole of our good Uncle Thomas's library. My education was neglected, yet I was passionately fond of reading. These volumes were my study day and night, and my familiarity with them increased that regret which I had felt as a child on learning that my father's dying injunction had forbidden my uncle to allow me to embark in a seafaring life. So what was the thing that was standing in the way of Walton's cherished dream?
His father's dying wish.
Yeah, his father's rules, right? Father's will. Right, so his father is dead, right? But his father's dying wish is the obstacle that stands in the way of him accomplishing his goal, right? Now, Victor Frankenstein's relationship with his father is maybe a little bit more complicated, right? If we go to the beginning of Frankenstein's own narrative, page 23, who does he tell us about first?
His ancestry.
Yeah, his ancestry, right?
He talks about his father.
And his father, right? So he begins his narrative, yeah, by talking about his father. And who is it that first shits on his favorite philosophers?
His father.
His father, right? His father calls Cornelius Agrippa sad trash, right? Page 27, right? My father looked carelessly at the title page of my book and said, "Ah, Cornelius Agrippa, my dear Victor, do not waste your time upon this. It is sad trash." If instead of this remark, my father had taken the pains to explain to me that the principles of Agrippa had been entirely exploded, and that a modern system of science had been introduced, which possessed much greater powers than the ancient, because the powers of the latter were chimerical, while those of the former were real and practical. Under such circumstances, I should certainly have thrown Agrippa aside, and, with my imagination warmed as it was, should probably have applied myself to the more rational theory of chemistry which has resulted from modern discoveries. It is even possible that the train of my ideas would never have received the fatal impulse that led to my ruin. But the cursory glance my father had taken of my volume by no means assured me that he was acquainted with its contents, and I continued to read with the greatest avidity. So where does Victor trace the beginning of his weird fixations?
Just in spite of his father?
Yeah. It's a middle finger to Dad, right? So you're gonna call my favorite book sad trash? Well, fuck you, I'm gonna make a monster. Right?
You're gonna inherit all your money and make a monster.
Yeah. But I think if we look at the general course of Victor's life as well, right? The decision for him to go to university at Ingolstadt, the decision that he's going to marry Elizabeth, right? Who makes all of the decisions about Victor's life?
His parents. Mainly his father.
Yeah. His father makes all of the decisions, right? So Victor is very much a prisoner of the law of the Father, the symbolic order, right? Everything he does is arguably a reaction against his father's dominance in his life, right? Because he claims frequently to love his cousin Elizabeth tenderly, right? But if he does, what's weird about his behavior towards her?
It's completely opposite.
Pardon?
It's like he says he loves her, but he's like pushing the relationship off and marrying her off.
Yeah, he keeps finding reasons to delay marrying her, right? And even, when he agrees to marry her and alludes to his dark secret, right? When is he going to tell her the secret? Not till after the wedding day, right? There's something weird.
Make sure she can't run away.
Okay.
Or get out of it by saying, you know what, he's insane.
But the other thing to note here, right? How does Victor spend his wedding night? Hiding, yeah. Probably as much from her, right, as from the creature. He's been dodging this marriage for years. And instead of telling her what kind of danger she's in, right? Instead of staying in the room with her to defend her if the creature shows up, he leaves her alone and goes to face the creature by himself, right? So I think the creature actually does serve a particular kind of purpose for Victor. How many of you are familiar with the term doppelganger?
Yeah. It's like a shadow self.
Yeah, it's a shadow self or a dark double, right? Now the creature doesn't look like Victor, right? But if we think back to the question I asked all at the beginning of your class, right? Instead of attacking Victor, what does the creature do? Pardon?
He
Yeah.
comes in the shadows.
Yeah.
He's a constant reminder to Victor of his failure.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and he kills in the shadows, he kills Elizabeth, right? He kills Clerval. And as you know, in the previous portion of the novel, he's killed little brother William. And indirectly has been the cause of the death of the servant girl Justine, and is the cause of the death of Frankenstein Sr., right? Yeah, go ahead.
So this is just a question. This is probably like totally wrong or weird. But do you think the monster is like what maybe Frankenstein's inner self, like so he can like revolt against like all the decisions that his dad made?
I think that there's something like that going on here. Yeah, I think that that's a good solid reading of this. Yeah, because it never does directly harm him, right? It lashes out at all these people that he claims to love, but against whom there also seem to be certain accumulated resentments, right? That essentially by destroying all of these other people, right, who are connected to Victor, the creature destroys the elder Frankenstein's plans for him. So the creature is a means of resisting the law of the Father. And I think, that we can also, sort of further this by saying, what is the creature's own nature? Where does it come from? Yeah.
Go ahead. You raised your hand.
Well, since the beginning, like he was always confused like a child. I feel like maybe the creature is actually Frankenstein's child self.
Okay.
And as children, as children, they tend to hold things in a lot until they lash out. And I feel like that's what the creature embodies. It's Frankenstein's like inner, like what he held down as a child, and it's coming out. I don't know if that makes sense.
I see exactly where you're going with this. Yeah, and the creature acts out in the ways that Victor couldn't.
The creature's what Victor would be if he didn't have what he had, if he didn't have all the advantages he did have. That's how Victor has a father, well-educated, good social standing, and the monster has none of that. He's abandoned, from his rebirth and everything. He's everything Victor could have been if he had not been awarded this good lot in life.
Yeah, so I think you said good lot in life, right? But I think one thing we might want to think about is what might actually be positive about the creature's condition. What is the creature that Victor isn't?
Free.
Yes, the creature is free, right? It's miserable, it's desperately unhappy, and does not want to be as free as it is, right? It actually craves social connection. But we can see that freedom, right? That freedom to create and destroy as coming from the same impulse, right? This is what Victor desired, right? Because the creature has no place in the social order. It's free to do as it chooses.
Better to be free and miserable than trapped and happy.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the, there's a motif that runs through this as well of references to John Milton's poem Paradise Lost.
I can't remember the exact line, but I think I know what portion you're referring to.
Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah. How many of you a couple of you nodded a little bit later. How many of you are familiar with Paradise Lost? Okay, at least most of you have a passing familiarity with it. Okay, so for those of you who don't know the poem, it is a very, very, very long poem that is drawn from a few lines from the second chapter of Genesis, right? And it details, the creation of the world and human beings, and the fall of the rebel angels from heaven, and Satan's attempts to subvert Adam and Eve and God's new creation, right? And there's a lot of weird cosmology and just kind of like bizarre ass shit in there too, right? But while Adam is ostensibly the hero of the poem, the character we actually kind of spend the most time with, and who ends up inadvertently, I think, on Milton's part, being the most sympathetic, is Satan, who is given a legitimate grievance against the heavenly powers. Right? He and the other angels have been supplanted by this new creation man. And he decides that rather than bowing down to this new creature he regards as inferior to himself, instead he is going to do whatever he can to wreck this new world, right? So he's kind of like, acting out his own pain on this new world and these new creatures, right? And yes, I think that we are meant to see some of that relationship between God and Satan here, right, in the scientist and his rebellious creation, right? And let's look also here at Victor's own attitude and its shifting nature towards the creature, right? What does the creature want from Victor?
A mate.
Yeah. The creature wants a mate. And I just want to take a quick look at the passage where the creature is describing its own murder of Justine on page 134, 135, right? Or the murder of William, sorry. As I fixed my eyes on the child, I saw something glittering on his breast. I took it. It was a portrait of a most lovely woman. In spite of my malignity, it softened and attracted me. For a few moments I gazed with delight on her dark eyes, fringed by deep lashes, and her lovely lips. But presently my rage returned. I remembered that I was forever deprived of the delights that such beautiful creatures could bestow, and that she whose resemblance I contemplated would, in regarding me, have changed the air of divine benignity to one expressive of disgust and affright. So the picture here that William has, the creature's looking at, who is it? Who's the picture of?
Caroline.
Yeah, this is Caroline Beaufort Frankenstein, or Victor's mother, right? And in what direction are the creature's thoughts moving as it examines this image? What does it seem to want from the image? What are its feelings towards the image?
Soft. Warm.
Yes, soft, warm, right? So, pardon?
Like it says, in spite of in spite of his anger and his
Yeah.
it's soft and attractive.
Yeah. And given his focus on the beauty of the woman in the picture, right? There does seem to be some level of sexual attraction there, right? But we also have to remember who the image is. Right? That not only is this a woman, right? This is also, we know, an image of a mother. And the creature lacks both of these things, right? No mate, no mother. And the fears that he has about what this woman would do on beholding his countenance, right, would equally well suit, a woman he was attracted to, or, a mother looking on a monstrous birth, right? Rejected either way. Now, when Victor agrees to the creature's terms, what fears cause him to abandon his projects?
That they'll make and spawn
Yeah.
generations of immortal monsters.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even clear. I mean, they're animated corpses, right? They're dead bodies sewn together that are having electricity jolted through them. So it's not even clear they would be able to reproduce, right? But that is a fear that he has.
You don't want to be a granddad?
What's that?
I said, come on, Victor, you don't want to be a granddad for monsters?
Well, I think that this fear is also a kind of projection of one of Victor's own fears. If we look at his father's words to him before his marriage to Elizabeth, right? If we turn to page 184, right, Father Frankenstein says, "My dear Victor, do not speak thus. Heavy misfortunes have befallen us. But let us only cling closer to what remains and transfer our love for those whom we have lost to those who yet live. Our circle will be small, but bound close by the ties of affection and mutual misfortune. And when time shall have softened your despair, new and dear objects of care will be born to replace those of whom we have been so cruelly deprived."
Go forth and multiply.
What's that?
Go forth and multiply.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that there is in Victor Frankenstein himself a genuine dread of reproduction. Right. We continue here, such were the lessons of my father, right? Literally the law of the father. You will go forth and multiply, my son. But to me, the remembrance of the threat returned. Nor can you wonder that, omnipotent as the fiend had yet been in his deeds of blood, I should almost regard him as invincible, and that when he had pronounced the words, "I shall be with you on your wedding night," I should regard the threatened fate as unavoidable. But death was no evil to me if the loss of Elizabeth were balanced with it. And I therefore, with a contented and even cheerful countenance, agreed with my father that if my cousin would consent, the ceremony should take place in 10 days, and thus put, as I imagined, the seal to my fate. Do we tend to, regard situations we're happy about as sealing our fate? Yeah, so he can put on a happy face here, right? But, fate is sealed. He goes, nope, you're going to be bound and tied to Elizabeth here.
The monster's going to appear on your wedding night.
Yeah. And he acts as though he thinks that means the monster's going to kill him, right? Yeah, I mean, I don't know about y'all, but I found his either he's really dense or he's trying very hard to convince himself of something, right? That the creature's target is him and not the people around him, not the people he loves.
Victor's always struck me as
What's that?
I said Victor's kind of always struck me as a he's an asshole. For lack of a better word. I'm sorry.
No, it's
Bad
good.
word, but that is how I've always read Victor. And always seen him in every adaptation of him.
I mean, well, it takes a certain special level of chutzpah, right, to, take it upon yourself to animate dead bodies, right?
Yeah. But then it's like it's your wedding night and you're terrified this monster's gonna come. Stay with your wife and protect her, dude.
Yeah.
Even if you're not happy about the marriage, it's still your family.
But yeah, he never really questions anything, or never openly questions anything he's told to do, right? If the orders come from the father, he just goes ahead and does it, right? Until his father dies. And then he's free to go chase the monster wherever, right? Although he is bound to his own offspring here. So he's still not free. Now, whose death did Victor seem more upset about to you? Elizabeth's or Henry Clerval's? Yeah, he spends there's a lot more ink spilled here on Clerval's death than Elizabeth's, right? So one way that the novel is sometimes written, I don't want to make too much out of this because I think this is subtext more than literal intent here, right? Is that when Elizabeth and the father keep asking Victor if he's in love with someone else, he is. That he is in fact in love with Clerval, right? Who's the one who comes to take care of him when he's sick. He's the one he goes off on his journey with together to England, and is the one who he mourns most when taken from him, right? And that even, Victor's attempt to create life without the intervention of a woman or a womb is an expression of, perhaps like a latent homosexual feelings, right?
Also, Clerval was his choice. Elizabeth wasn't.
Yeah. Clerval is, they all grow up together, right? Yeah, but Clerval isn't a member of the family. Yeah. He's included in the family circle, but is not, is not a relation. One of the reasons I wanted to bring this up is that a lot of film adaptations of Frankenstein play in particular with this queer subtext, right? Even the old 1930s black and white versions, it's present on some level. And then in more contemporary adaptations, it's often more overt, right? So if you look at like something like the Rocky Horror Picture Show, right? It's basically Frankenstein with the queer subtext brought to the forefront and a glam rock soundtrack, right? So, I think that Victor's obedience to the law of the father here is coupled with kind of like fear, dread, or disgust related to women as well. Yeah, Kathy.
Going back to the fear of reproduction, do you think he's scared that the creature could possibly be reproduced because he realized that he made the creature and it turned out to be something so normal to him that if something like that happens, then it's all his fault. So do you think that's why? Because it all started with him, for him to create something so horrible.
Yeah.
He can create something worse. Maybe that's why he's fearful of it?
Yeah, he seems to be terrified of leaving behind any kind of legacy, right? Whether it's creatures that can multiply, or even he won't even tell Walton his secret here. He won't tell Walton how he did it, because he doesn't want anyone else to do this, right? Although, you know, one could also maybe read that as possessiveness, right? That as vile as he regards this creature, and it's his creation, and it's a unique thing in the world, and it wouldn't be a unique thing in the world if someone else was able to make one, right?
Or maybe it's like childhood trauma that he wants to get back at his father, and his father is still like pushing him to reproduce and get married. But then like the wife that his father gave him, he resents it so much to the point he just wants to end it all, you know?
Yeah, she writes to him, but he never writes back to her, right? In fact, like, you know, when he is most deeply engrossed in his work is when he is ignoring his family obligations most, right? So yeah. Where are we for time? Okay, we're close to end of class here. But yeah, I think I'm trying to think about a way to sum all this up. I'm coming up blank. So yeah, I think that like there is a real kind of like powerful comment on gender relations generally in the novel, and on the shaping and nurturing role of families, but where the nurturing family can be just as stifling as the emotional and physical abandonment can be, right? And that I think like this kind of like dichotomy between the total freedom of the creature, which breeds its own kind of misery, and the more subtle misery of Victor, who is trapped in this web of family relationships. I think we can take this back out to the outer frame, in that Walton is also writing to, like, not only is he someone who was stifled by his father, right, but he's also someone who is writing to, feels obligated to communicate with a family member who's not part of this expedition, right? His communications are back home are to his sister. And in returning to England, or deciding to return to England, he's deciding to return to the familiar hearth and the familiar web of family relationships, rather than staying out all alone on the ice, right? With sailors who he can't communicate with. So we don't really have time to pull this out, but I think that alienation element is part of it as well. That Walton feels alone in the icy seas. Okay, so does anybody have any questions about this or anything else they want to say? All right, so I'll turn the board back around for those of you who did not get all of the guide questions, and we'll see you on Wednesday. Oh,